Hello and welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. It's 11:44 on a Monday morning. Haven't yet shaved, but before that there's the important priority of going through the Cowley OCA Blitz games. I am grinding through them and I will not stop until I've gained enormous insight into all of these players and what they're up to. So last time we looked at a winterowl's loss in the England Gambit, the Black Side England Gambit. So now we're going to show a glorious victory of winterowl. Winterowl came third, and this is a game that he won against the eventual tournament winner, DayvanCowboy, who did very well. Let's have a look at both of these people. Winterowl, Chris Evans, chess, reading, sci-fi, fantasy, World of Warcraft. Well done, Chris. And then DayvanCowboy, Phil, one of the lads from the Chess Pit podcast, also half of Makepeace with Chess Limited, that provides the world with their chess coaching needs. Well, he won this tournament, so pretty good at chess, I would say, by the look of it. And we are going to look at this really interesting game. I think I had a similar game, actually, against DayvanCowboy, but I managed to lose it. So I was playing the Sicilian as well. e4, c5, knight f3, d6. So this is very standard stuff. Bishop b5 is a commonly played, sensible, sound move. For instance, Magnus Carlsen versus Veselin Topalov in this line. Looks like Topalov managed to win that one, 2015. But anyway, in fact, there's games with Magnus on both sides, the white and the black side, which often says how important a variation can be. You've got the world champion on both sides of it. So, bishop b5 check. Now, this does not win the queen automatically, and it's not checkmate. There are really, I would say, three ways of meeting this. Knight c6, knight d7, bishop d7. And our friend winterowl takes, I would say, the most ambitious one, actually. Knight d7. Is it the one the engine prefers? Well, it's a bit of a tie. So knight d7. White castles very sensibly. a6. By the way, this is an absolute tactical feast. I mean, the tactics at the end of this are mind-boggling, really. White chooses to take and give up the two bishops, but gain a tempo here. You can play bishop e2, bishop d3, and actually the engine slightly prefers those. On d3, the bishop's defending the pawn, quite obviously, and I think moves like c3 can come along afterwards. Maybe the bishop can go to c2, and then white can play for d4, although other things can happen too, of course. That's chess. Anyway, white takes, black takes back. White goes ahead and plays d4 as it might be an open Sicilian, a slightly different kind of open Sicilian, because often people play bishop b5 to avoid the open Sicilian, but in this case white's just playing a different open Sicilian. Takes with the queen. Both captures are possible there, but the queen captures more popular and gets better results. Black plays an offbeat move here, queen c7. Of course, the queen so frequently comes to c7 in the Nadorf, the Can, and the Schwenningen variations of the Sicilian. So this is a very natural thing to do. The engine wants e5, just hidden the queen. That kind of Nadorf move with tempo, or rook c8. Actually, in both cases, black wins more than loses, so the black stats are positive for e5 and rook c8. Quick note there. Queen c7, natural knight development. Pawn e6, the engine move. The rook naturally getting on that open file, I guess putting pressure on that weak d-pawn. Bishop coming on to c6, attacking the white e-pawn, which can also become weak. And also maybe making space for the rook to come to d8 to defend the pawn. Bishop e3, knight f6, natural development, and then the bishop moves. So I'm not saying that the last two moves of white were wrong, but you wonder if that was completely accurate, with the bishop moving twice like that, changing its mind, after such a natural move as knight f6. And actually the engine's got black a bit better here. Bishop e7. Black takes here, and now white takes here. Black chooses to take with the pawn, keeping the defence of the d6 pawn, but actually the engine wants to take with the bishop, and basically what the engine wants to do is bishop takes f6, queen takes d6, queen takes d6, rook takes d6, bishop takes on c3, pawn takes on c3, and then pick up the e-pawn, which is a really pretty little sequence. And actually, I think quite common in the Sicilian. Anyway, black goes this way, and basically what black's going to do is use that shell of pawns in the centre to shield his king, and then perhaps put the rook on the g file for activity, attacking the white king. Again, this is a reasonably common strategy. And I mean a reasonably good strategy. You know, common is not a bad thing. Often things are common because they work. Rook g8, queen h6. This is awkward for black, and actually now white's a little bit better. And actually black's just gone ahead and castled long. They do say, don't they, that if you castle long in the Sicilian, then something's gone wrong. You could even make that rhyme if you tried. I don't think I'd go that far. But the point about the Sicilian is you open the c-file, and so putting the king on the c-file looks a bit odd. In this case, it doesn't seem to cause any problems. It's a pretty good move, and it's just the way the game's developed, really. I mean, with the king side kind of wrecked. So now white's picking up a pawn. Black defends the f-pawn, and white's, I assume, carrying out some kind of doubling operation here. Stockfish doesn't like this, wants to play rook d3 instead, and I know why. I know why, actually. I've looked at this. So black plays the accurate move f5, and then white plays another move that Stockfish disapproves of, knight d4 here. And the point here is that black is trapping the white queen. So bishop g5, rook moves to d3, then basically rook h8, queen g7, rook fg8, and the queen's trapped. The queen's got no square to go to. And of course the point about that bishop g5 move hitting the rook, so creating tempo because it hit the rook, the point about it is it defends the f-pawn. It allows the f-rook to move away and attack the queen on g8. And leave that f-pawn defended. Okay, so anyway, you know, in the heat of Blitz, winterowl took, and it's sort of sensible, swap one of those doubled f-pawns for an e-pawn. Winterowl took. White exchanged the powerful c6 bishop, which was actually defending that pawn. Black takes back, continues to defend, and then white takes on e4. So white's a pawn up, right? When I was looking at this earlier, my temptation would be to take the queens off and try and defend the endgame. I mean, the bishop's probably a little bit better than the knight, and but let's remind ourselves I lost against this opponent. But basically, my instinct would be take the queens off, try and defend the endgame. It's an interesting endgame. Yeah, white's got an outside pass pawn. Black's got a bishop, probably a bit better than the knight, and you know, I don't know, takes d5, and then black's got the pawns on light squares. Looks pretty interesting to me, and in fact that's what the engine, that's one of the lines the engine likes. Okay, so black played d5 but without exchanging queens. White's backed off. I'm playing pretty quickly here because there's a lot of juice, as it might be. Black doubling on that open file. It's a natural thing, isn't it, looking at the king, but white's got this g3 move which really blunts that. You know, that pawn on g3 is really strong, and there's no sort of pawn f4 or pawn h4 to try and undermine it. Black hits the rook, puts the bishop on a good diagonal, and at least pins the f-pawn. So I suppose if black can attack that g-pawn one more time, maybe with the queen, then there's prospects, because now the f-pawn's pinned. Rook's coming here to attack the f-pawn, which black defends by advancing it. And this is a good move, but I mean, those pawns are starting to look a bit brittle. But you know, this is the right move. Rook attacks the backward pawn, which black defends with the king. Now, the engine doesn't like this, I suppose, because tactical possibilities are starting to emerge against the king and queen right in the centre there. White plays a good move, rook h4, although manoeuvring with the knight looked even better. Rook 8 g7. White's coming across now again and attacking this backward e-pawn. It's really uncomfortable, isn't it? Which black has to block. Swaps. Now again the queen's relentlessly pursuing this rook. It doesn't like this move, so this sacrifice by the knight on d5 is a killer for white. Again, hard to see. So what we can see is knight takes d5. If queen takes d5, you've got rook d1, pinning the queen against the king. I haven't looked at the alternatives. So if knight takes on d5 here, if you take with a pawn, I assume it's queen f5 check. Looks pretty grisly. Should we have a look? Take with a pawn? It's not, look, it's queen e8 check. The queen f5 check's equal. Queen e8 check. King c7. Aha. Queen e5 check wins the rook. Okay, so yeah, that queen check on the back. The point is, if you take with the pawn, it opens up that file and allows the queen check at the back, and then the rook's just dropping to a fork. Okay, so that was a nice sack, but again we're playing Blitz here, and let's see how much time these guys have got. Can I see how much time? He's got 1 minute 34, so it's approaching bullet territory. He's still got the queens on, so and later on we'll see a bit more of that. Winterowl has conserved his time better, so he's on 2 minutes and 20. Black comes back very sensibly, defending that backward pawn. The white queen comes around. Black pinning the knight against the queen again. Now you can see the sense in this, can't you? Just reducing the mobility in those white pieces. Well, actually pinning the knight against the queen and rook. White breaks the pin. There's a lot more chess to play here, by the way. It's absolutely amazing. Bishop reverts to c5. Now the pin is gone. So again, the engine wants to play h4 here, I guess just making use of that passed pawn. That's not very natural for a human to play with the queen still on. I don't think I would weaken the shelter around my king. I mean, for instance, where it makes g3 weak, I as a human, and I am a human, I wouldn't really want to play that. The other idea is king g2, which is a lot more natural. Although that's running into a discovered check, so I'm not sure it is. Alright, enough guessing. Knight e2. Black's got back to equality. Black's picked up a pawn, but now the king's looking vulnerable. So Black wants to keep the position closed. I'm going to play pretty quickly. Hits the rook. Okay, I think that's a good square for the knight. The engine's not so sure, but there's a lot going on. Get the rook opposite the king. Attacking that knight. Now, basically, it thinks white's better. Why is white better? I guess black's king's just quite wobbly and weak. And white's king is pretty good. I guess that's the logic. Black comes back to defend. Of course, you can't move the knight now because the rook drops. White hits the black rook. And white's sort of blocked. You can move the knight. The rook doesn't drop if you put the knight in the way of the queen. Black plays e5, which is the engine move. I mean, I'd worry about playing that because it's immediately pinned and the king's getting more and more vulnerable. Queen e3. Black continues to advance. Engine doesn't like this. And now, okay, the engine wants rook b1, which you can immediately see why, because he's taken on b7 with check afterwards. Black hits the white queen, but now white's really winning. Check. Rook in the way. The engine wants knight takes. Why? Should we see why? Can I see why? Knight takes. Pawn takes. The rook is pinned. No, I can't see why, but I want to know. Knight takes. Pawn takes. Queen g7 check. You can't put the rook in the way? Oh, it's also complicated, isn't it? Queen e5 check. King f8. Queen d8 checkmate. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Gosh. Hard stuff. Okay. So anyway, the engine wants this, but you know, DayvanCowboy's got 32 seconds left. So this is part of the, I think, of the story of this game, which is 32 seconds is, what's it called? Ultra Blitz. Hyper Blitz. It's very fast. You know, in the old days, chess is people sitting down, stroking their chins, thinking hard about things, not all this, you know, mouse clicking and racing around. 26 seconds for DayvanCowboy. So really what winterowl's done here is just really hung on in terms of time. I mean, there is an increment, but you know, so it's not just 26 seconds, but still, it's very short time. Queen check, king here. Now there's a mate in 11. Who can find the mate in 11? Well, Knight d4 check was the first move. That's a bit. I think mate 11 is a bit much, but later on there's some ones we'll try and find out. White centralises the queen. Quite natural, isn't it? Centralise the queen again down to 20 seconds. Queen c3. What black has to do now is just set white some problems that hopefully take some time to solve. And actually, black did this. c5 from white. That's defended twice, so why not? Attacking the bishop, just hitting the thing, and now the queen's penetrating. Look, queen d8 check. This is mate in 5, so we should be able to find this. So king s7, rook d7 check, mate in 4, king g6, queen g8 check. He's following the line. King h5. So let's find this mate in 3. Queen h7 check. King runs to g4. Where else could the king run to? The king could run to g5, where I assume the move rook g7 is pretty grim. Put the rook in the way, you can take that. So the king has to run back. Come on, let's do it. Let's do all the variations. So what does white actually play? Okay, white plays the rook, which again is still mating. But let's have a look at these queen lines because it's interesting. 7k, king g5, rook g7 check, rook g6, queen takes g6. Very good. Actually, rook takes g6 works as well. Okay, so, but you know, I've got plenty of time. I mean, these guys were absolutely blitzing at the end here. Queen g4. So, look at that. Pretty, and I would say quite an original checkmate. Quite hard to see, probably. Anyway, rook went, rook in the way, queen check here, still mating. Check with a pawn, good move. Now, at this moment, fascinating. White can just pick off the black rook. With 14 seconds on the clock, white can pick off the black rook. White chose to give a check here in the style of a kind of parallel mate. Black plays king h3 and he's won. That's absolutely fascinating because his king's hidden. Although his king's very close to the other king, his king's hidden. There are really no more checks. And all of a sudden, black is threatening queen e1 checkmate. And it's really, really hard to deal with. I mean, what does white do here? So, moves the king, queen d3 check, king here, bishop c3 check, and it's over. Did white resign? White resigned. Very graciously, white resigned. So well done to winterowl for setting enough problems to DayvanCowboy to, I mean, he's on 5 seconds at the end, keep his time running. And also well done for spotting that sequence at the end. You know, queen d3 check's reasonably hard to find. He had a minute left on the clock. Queen d3 check. If the king goes the other way, I assume the queen coming to the back just ends it, doesn't it? Yeah. So if the king goes to g1, then queen d1 just ends the game. Because, you know, that f-pawn is stopping the king. It's like a sort of back row classic king and queen checkmate, except the f-pawn is participating as well, the white f-pawn. So this was a good move, this queen d3, and then the king comes out and the bishop checks, an absolute killer. White has no dark square bishop. And white's pieces are busy having chased the black king right up the board, and then the black king then helped in the checkmate. Oh well, that happens in chess. Bad luck, DayvanCowboy, but you won the whole tournament, so a bit of at say the least, more than consolation there. And well done, winterowl. Next game we will look at the games of the tournament winner. And I'm going to abandon this format at some point, this format of just doing the hand-ons all the time, because it's driving me around the bend. I'm just going to start freestyling soon and just look at whatever games I want to, including some games that people have asked me to look at. Keep well. I hope lockdown's treating you well. We hope to see you soon, and we might even reintroduce the dog, because I've had a number of questions about where the dog is. See you soon.